Welcome to our lesson about blending in your letters with your Karin markers. We're going to be talking about 3 different ways to create your letters to show beautiful watercolor blending that you can have within your letters. The first is with one color and water. The second is with 2 different colors that meet up. And the third is with 2 colors and water. Sort of like we're combining 1 and 2 to make 3. Weird, that's actually what it adds up to too. I like it. So for the first one, pick one of your colors and we are going to start with a letter over on the side of your watercolor paper. Now for this, you can use just a scrap of paper because you are trying something new out. Anytime that I go in to create a blend, especially for letters, I always test it out first. And I test out these 3 techniques with the colors that I'm thinking of using to determine which one looks best. So even the piece of paper you use today, you can save for future tests. So the very first style is just one color and some water. Now, I do have both a paintbrush and a water brush. I would suggest testing both of those out. My personal favorite water brush is the Moltov water brush. It has very, very nice control and my brush has never frayed. Many of my other brushes have ended up being a little bow-legged, if you will, but this one has kept its really nice controlled point and it's super easy to use. So I would highly suggest spending a few extra dollars to get this water brush because it will last for you. Otherwise, when you're doing your letters, you're going to want to use a small size brush. That way you can have really good control over the paint that you're picking up and the water that you're using to blend colors together. You're also going to want to have some paper towel. That's a really good way to be able to pick up paint. If your brush is too wet, you're not going to be able to pick up or shift your paint around very well. So just fold yourself some paper towel and have that to the side, ready to dab your paintbrush onto to take off that extra moisture. So with whichever color you would like, our very first one is to use one color and the water. And you are going to write your letter. Now, before you move on to any other letter, because we want to deal with this before it dries in too much, you are going to go in to the downstroke areas with a tiny bit of water on your paintbrush, start to lift up some color. So clear water, little bit of water on there. See how it's lightening up the paint? And then you're going to brush off that excess onto your paintbrush. So when you do that, you're adding water onto your piece, which means you are going to want to lift some of that water up. So I'm just going into that same space, brushing over it from the light area to the dark and lifting up some water. And as you do that, wipe your brush off onto your paper towel, which will allow your paintbrush the ability to suck up some more paint. So moving on to our next area, our next downstroke, with a mostly wet brush, just a tiny tap to the paper towel, you are going to go in and add that water into your downstroke. Then take the extra water off of your paintbrush and from the middle of your downstroke, brushing up and then tapping to your paper towel to lift that extra water off. Now you're going to want to continue your stroke all the way to the end at least once just to keep that flow of water looking natural. And if you want it lightened more, go back into your water, add a bit more onto your piece, and then go through lifting that water up again and off the piece. And as you lift, you're pushing this dark saturated paint to the sides, and you're also lifting paint off the page and putting it onto your paper towel. You'll notice that this gives you this really, really dark saturated edge and a lighter center. And that can be a very nice effect for your piece. You can go back and do more. Now you'll notice that this has mostly dried, so it's not pushing out to the side as it used to. That just means you need to reactivate it by touching all of that with your wet paintbrush. And now you'll be able to push again. We can take some more clean water, drop it into the center, not too much. You don't want a huge drop of water, but just a little bit, drop it into the center. It pushes that dark color out to the edge, and then you can go in and lift up some of that color from your letter. This helps to create a nice glowing area. It creates more contrast between the dark edges and the light center of your downstrokes and gives so much more visual interest to your letter. Now, if you want, you can also go back in and add more color to those upstrokes, again, to make them darker. And right to the very end of where you were adding that water, you can also choose to do some of those edges. If you have a very light touch, just add a little bit more color in the edge. And again, this increases the drama and the contrast of your letter between the area where you lifted the paint off and the area where you have added even more paint. So here we have a rich, deep letter where we used just one color and water. This gives us the variety of colors that one watercolor paint is able to give. When you have more paint, you have a darker, more saturated tone, and then less paint, you have a lighter tone. And you'll see that I'm losing the lightness in this downstroke, so you can always go back, activate it with more water, and then lift a little bit more off. I always sort of like to pay attention to them as they're drying to make sure that they are drying with that light and dark contrast. Let's move on to our letter where we're using two colors. Now for this one, we're not going to be using a lot of water to blend the two. Instead, we're going to be using a mostly dry paintbrush and two colors to blend. When you do this technique, it will be most successful if you use colors that are beside each other on the color wheel. So for instance, green and blue, or a light green and a dark green, or a light blue and a dark blue. But combining red and blue, which are on opposite sides of the color wheel, is probably not your best bet for this type of blend. Typically, colors opposite on the color wheel will mix together to make brown, and that's not what we're looking for. We're looking instead for a soft change from one color to the next. For this one, let's do a light green and a dark green and see how we can blend these, keeping very saturated colors. In order to keep the saturation high, we're not going to be adding a ton of water to this piece. So for our next letter, you typically want to choose either the top or the bottom of the letter to have your lighter color, and then the other side is your darker color. So we'll do a light loop over the top with our lighter tone. And you usually want to give that lighter tone to all areas of your letter. So what I mean is I've also put a little bit at the top of the loop that will create the B. And then down at the bottom, you will continue your letter on. Now this can sometimes be tricky because you can lose that beautiful straight line heading down the back of your letter. So just watch out that you are very aware of where your letter will end up being. Now you can see that right here, those two didn't combine perfectly. With your lighter color, any places where the two didn't combine, go in and just touch up or redraw those areas where the letters should have met. Using your lighter color means that you're not going to be overwhelming your piece with your deeper color, and it also starts the blend effect. So you can choose to either use just that light color and blend it out with the actual brush of the pen, but I find that sometimes that can add too much color to the piece. So what I like to do is with a mostly dry, clean brush, so I've tapped it onto an area of clean paper towel, you can now go in and use that just to direct the blend, to make sure that it's very gentle. If you want the dark color to come up higher, you can pull that up and make sure that you have that really soft, natural blend. Even getting some of that darker color coming up this area of your letter, and then blending down if you want that lighter color to move its way down. Now for this area here, we lost a bit of that lightness. So going in with your brush again, and just without a lot of water this time, following that line and lifting up a bit of that darker paint, you'll be able to control the way that the paints are blending. And even lifting up that paint, you can get to the lighter tone of your dark color, because less paint means a lighter color. As you're doing this, just watch out that you're not going over the edges of any areas of your letter, because that will start to make it look messy. So you want to be very, very controlled and also conservative with the way that you're using your brush. Don't get in there and think that you're going to redraw any of your lines. If you need to fix up your edges, use your color, because that will give you a very consistent look to your piece. So we'll draw in maybe a lead into the B here using the color, and then with the paintbrush, that's when you just go in and sort of show the color where to go, like a bit of a color usher. You're ushering the color around. We still want that nice dark green coming up this portion of the B and maybe blending even a little bit into there. And using the paintbrush that is clean and mostly dry to do that will allow you to get a very gentle, natural looking blend. You can see that we have two very different looks in that. You may prefer one or the other, or for a specific piece, you may prefer one or the other. Now let's look at how you can blend two colors that are opposite on the color wheel, and that is by using your two colors and water. For this letter here, we drew the letter so that the two colors actually ended up touching. When you're using two colors and water, you're going to want to leave a space in between the two colors where only water will be placed. So you can imagine, okay, here we'll have a downstroke, and then here we'll have the second color coming up. And this one can be tricky to get your letter the exact way you want it right at the beginning, but I'll show you how you can touch it up as you go along. So with a paintbrush that has no drips but still has a fair amount of water in the brush, you are going to start to paint in that middle area. Now you don't want to paint too much right away. Paint a little bit, and you can see that this blue has shot up. We don't want too much of that happening, so you can even go in and sort of coax it back a little bit, take off some extra by wiping onto your paper towel before going in now and introducing the orange. So with that paintbrush, I'm going in and painting either side of the C, creating that thick downstroke, but with the paintbrush. Now you can see that this is lightening up that orange color. I still haven't gone in and made them touch yet. If you make them touch too soon, you will end up with that brown. So instead, you want to get that color nice and light by taking off some extra color with a mostly water-only paintbrush. And then finally, when both colors are almost clear, you can go and connect your outer downstroke and your inner downstroke. Now you'll see here that the edge is not absolutely perfect, and this is a good time to use your paintbrush and just really fill in that edge. The paint has started to dry here, which means that you can either reactivate it with some water or by adding a little bit more of the color in there just to make sure that you have a nice seamless blend. This reminds me of one of those rocket pops that you could get in the summers from the ice cream truck. Delicious. And now we can go in and add like a nice crisp tip to the C here. We can work on that edge, making it absolutely perfect. And you have gone from a saturated orangey red into a blue by creating this area of lightness. This gives a light and airy feel to your letter. Now this can also be done for colors that are beside each other on the color wheel if you want to create that light, airy look inside your piece. So 3 different techniques for doing letters with your Karin markers. One where it's a marker and water, one where it's 2 markers close to each other on the color wheel, and then one where it's any 2 markers plus a lot of water. As you're doing this one, make sure that you're slowly bringing your colors together, that you've faded them out to almost nothing, and then finally allowing them to meet. It's like meeting in no man's land, in the center there where it's mostly water, not so much of a strong opinion or very strong saturated colors. Then after you go through and get that meeting, you can go back with your markers themselves to touch up or further define the areas of full saturation. In our next lesson, we will be putting all of these different techniques together to create a wreath, a monogram in the center and a beautiful wreath around. I can't wait to put all these skills together and see what you can create.